Anyway, my friends, now we're dealing with the intellect. Number 6 on page 39. Our dependence on bodily things shows the passivity of the intellect, which performs the act of know, this act called know. Thus, the intellect is dependent on our senses for all of its knowledges. The senses are the windows of the soul. Now, it depends, and we're going to see some illustrations now, how we can prove that the intellect depends upon the senses. Those that deny it observe it as if it's true. Those that deny it. For instance, in ceremonial, for instance in graduation, we dress up in a special dress to impress ourselves with the importance of the occasion. And you can't believe it when you're a faculty member and you see the students, the way some of the fellows and girls dressed up. I mean, it's almost startling to see them, the way they dress during the year, and then the way they dress up on with, what do you call it, a bouquet, and with something on their hat, thanks mum, and all sorts of things. The use of uniforms in general, special colours, for example, the police, soldiers, firemen, brass bands, primitive people. You've never seen anything till you've seen the people of New Guinea. I haven't seen them, but I've seen many pictures taken by my friends, the Passionist Fathers up there. They say it's the most brilliant dress you've ever seen. All these flowers of paradise decorating them when they have their great ceremonials. Then a priest at Mass, he wears special clothing with a diversity of colours for the same reasons. Special occasions. The Zulus with dress and dances even in time of war to impress themselves, and even their hearing. Soldiers will go into battle shouting, "Let's go and get 'em," etc. Although they use more profanity than that. Churches are special places to set apart to remind us of the solemnity of its activities. Monuments, cenotaphs, crucifixes, crowns, photos, etc. on various monies, for instance. Now, first, the next point we have to develop is the role of the impressed species in the possible intellect. The species, of course, is the form as it is in the knower. It represents the look of the thing. That's what the word species in Latin means, look, the look or the face. They'll speak sometimes of the species meaning the face. It really means the look of something. Why does the impressed species, why is it in the possible intellect? It represents the known. The known's presented out there, but it's represented here. Makes it present, makes the tree present to the knower. Secondly, the organ is stimulated in preparation for the act of knowledge. Thirdly, the possible intellect allows the knower to possess the material used to produce the express species. This express species expresses the concept as received by the knower. The intellect expresses within itself what it understands and the method whereby it understands, which we'll come to in a second. So it's not a giraffe I'm observing out there, it's a tree.
So the impressed species is what you're looking at?
Yep, what's impressed on us.
And
The look of the thing as it's impressed on our minds, impressed on us. Okay. We don't make the object of the intellect, we find it. We look for it. Sorry.
Could you define again the term possible intellect?
The possible intellect is possible to be all things. I think we've got that here in just a second. It's possible to be all things. The intellect, by having the form of all the knowers, all the knowables outside me, it's possible to be them all. That's why it's called the possible intellect. Also called the patient intellect sometimes. It's possible to be everything. And that which can be all, as we'll see presently, does be none. We'll come to that very shortly. On page 4, the role of the agent intellect. The problem. How does the universal concept come out of an image which represents the singular? There's an infinite gulf between the two. The singular cannot give rise itself to the universal concept, or the lesser would be causing the greater. The greater would be coming out of the lesser. I've got an image of Bob. It cannot produce a universal image because the universal image is unlimited. It represents Bob, Mary, Maud, Ted, Wilhelmina, and Murgatroyd Winterbottom. It represents all of them, the concept. So an image can't produce what represents everything, the very nature of everything. It's too big a job for it, as the philosophers have seen. So it'll be very rewarding now to examine the history of the problem. The universal versus the singular. The one versus the many. That was the first great problem all in the history of philosophy. The one versus the many. Did you have? Oh, okay. The singular cannot give rise itself to the universal, or the greater would be coming out of the lesser. Now, the history of the problem. How is it possible to go from the singular to the universal, which is unlimited? That is why some foolish writers have said they wasted time over how many angels could dance on the head of a pin. By the way, I have never seen that in any medieval document, and I've taught medieval philosophy as a particular subject for the medieval period. I've never seen that even referred to. But that's the scandalous rubbish that's written about the medieval period. We'd argue over such trivialities as how many angels could dance on the head of a pin. Because if it's said to me, I say, right, answer the question, solve the problem. How many angels can dance on the head of a pin, and what is the problem? They were too wise to ask questions like that because angels don't occupy space. And to dance on the top of a pin, you'd have to occupy space. And that doesn't make sense. It's an absurd question. So, the following illustrates the influences as seen by various philosophers. This is on page 40, of course. These are just bringing home the influences, that's all, and gives you a little bit of a framework for history. Plato taught his pupil Aristotle. Plato was taught by Socrates, but Socrates never wrote a thing. Half of Plato's life, his intellectual life, he wrote what Socrates taught. Then the other half of his life, he wrote what he wanted to teach. He went through the Platonic period. And it's easy to see the two periods because, first of all, it's all dialogues. What do you think this is? Oh, I don't know. Is it this or is it that? Backwards and forwards they went with dialectic, picking through all the opinions. That was Socrates' method. Trying to tie people down to truth. They used to talk a lot of nonsense in Athens. Prior to that, there were sophists. Sophists were pretended wisdom, pretended wise people in Athens. And they would argue, trying to convince each other or to trick each other with reasoning. Very, very strange reasoning. You know, like no dog has one more tail than no dog, but no dog has 99 tails, therefore one dog has 100 tails. Things like that. And they would trick each other by what's called sophistry, or pretended wisdom. So Socrates would tie them down. Now you said no dog has 99 tails. What do you mean by no dog? He'd tie them down and make them define their terms. And he took them through, put them through the mill. And it is said that's why the Greeks founded or saved Western civilization. The three Socratics: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Each taught the other. They were called peripatetics. Peripatetics comes from two Greek words. It's all one word. To wander around, perimeter around. And patein in Greek means to walk. the pitter-patter of little feet. In French language, your feet are known as les pieds, but the feet of a table or the feet of a dog are pat, P-A-T-T-E, coming from the Greek. So the peripatetics are men who walked around Athens, and I stood in Athens looking down there and I was thinking, boy, I'd like to be able to turn the clock about 2,500 years back and see those fellas walking there now. I just looked at the streets around me in the old Greek section of Athens. And they were called peripatetics because they walked around and discussed things amongst themselves. They didn't have a school till they founded the school. Plato founded one and then Aristotle founded another. So Plato taught Aristotle, and Aristotle went on, and St. Thomas took Aristotle and Plato. Augustine went a little bit to the side. We'll talk about him after. He was influenced as much by Plato as Aristotle. Plato needed correcting, a lot of correcting. Aristotle corrected him. Aristotle then, in turn, needed some correction by St. Thomas. Plato and Aristotle taught Avicenna, particularly Aristotle. I'll deal with them when we come to them. And Avicenna went on and taught, indirectly, he influenced Averroes. And these fellows all lived in the 10th, 12th century. So first let's take Plato. How did he explain what was in the intellect, which is infinitely above the singular? Because remember, the concept is universal. It's infinite in its application. Potentially infinite. If you've got infinite series of men, the concept still applies to it. Yet it came out of this singular individual Bob. How did that happen? Here's Plato's and Socrates. Socrates, remember Plato recorded Socrates' stuff. You'll see there that we have, let's say, let me get a diagram on the board first. I think it'll make it a bit easier. Here's Bob, and here's Joe, Mary, Ted, and those three imitate the idea of man. Man is a pure idea, as Plato called it, and Socrates, in another world, which Bob's soul saw before he came into this life. You see, for the Greeks, the soul is imprisoned in the body. That was what was so... the soul. That's what is so funny. In Athens, they've got outside of Athens, they've got a cave there, and it's supposed to be the cave where where Socrates was imprisoned and finally died, where he had to poison himself and died, condemned to death. And he wouldn't try and escape because he said, no, it's a man's duty to stay by the society, etc., and to stand for truth. Anyway, Bob, his soul is imprisoned in his body. Plato had a great idea of forms and soul. Great idea, understood them well, but he didn't understand matter and the relationship between body and soul. He didn't understand that. He just saw the soul as something imprisoned in man. But what am I touching? Am I touching soul or body? I'm touching both. Where does my thinking take place? In my head or on my feet? Both. We'll see that later. That the internal senses, imagination, etc., in the brain, therefore the intellect is more conscious of our thinking with the head. We'll come to that later when we come to dealing with the intellect better. So Plato said, there's a pure man there, there's a pure horse, there's a pure redness. Even he said, yes, we must admit it, there's a pure mud, pure tree. And when my soul came into my body, when I saw Joe, I remembered man, and he's like man. He called this reminiscence. A being, he called the demiurge, made Joe modelled after man, made Mary modelled after man, made Ted modelled after man. I'm using man generically here, of course. And our souls got the idea, our intellect's there, and somehow there. It reminded us. And our whole life is supposed to be an ambition ultimately to get to the world of pure forms. That's why Socrates didn't hesitate to drink the hemlock, to poison himself. Because he said, well, that's what the philosophers are after, isn't it, to get into the next life? They thought that the soul was sent back into a body, and this is where this idea of transmigration of, reincarnation comes from. That the soul is sent back to the body, not sure why, because it didn't have enough good ideas. It wasn't ready to go to the other world. But they had the wrong idea. Like the woman who said to me in Ottawa, what do you think of reincarnation? I said, it's rubbish. Oh, well, if you think it's rubbish, you've never read anything on it to know what it's about. I said, no, it's precisely the opposite, because I said I do know a lot about it, because that's why I reject it. Because if this lady's soul came back into another body, the body, since it's a soul and a form, a substantial form, would make the matter look exactly as she is now and give her all the memories, etc. Because the soul is what informs the whole being of us. It's not something hidden down inside us, like that foolish surgeon said to me in Australia, I've operated on many people and never found a soul yet. And I said, I'd be damn surprised if you said you did one. I'd call you a liar. I was so shocked that it had me so foolish to say such a silly thing. So, there's Plato. He lays it out in his book called the Phaedo, particularly. Phaedo. That's what a very la-di-da lady called her little puppy, Fido, P-H-A-E-D-O. So, anyway, so there's a pure horse, and all the horses resemble it. There's an imitation of that. He called it the process of participation. Ted participates in the ideal man. Dobbin participates in the ideal horse. This pool of mud participates in the idea of mud. They were forced to that. At least they were very logical, trying to be very logical, though they didn't make a very wonderful job of it. But you've got to remember, this is only about the 4th century. It's only the 5th century BC, the 4th century BC, only the 5th century BC when philosophers start to philosophize. And the first one was Thales. I couldn't think of his name for a second. Thanks. Thales. And he was recognized as the first official philosopher. Then there were great men like Anaxagoras. Men we don't even have a word of their writing. We've got to deduce it from what Aristotle said, some of them. But yet they were great men. What was it somebody Woodbury once said about the little town of Stagira in the northeastern part of Greece, where Aristotle was born? And it'll be known for the rest of eternity, and yet so many great men, early great philosophers, whose names will be remembered for eternity, come from there. But Professor John Anderson, the University of Sydney, God help us if he could be called a philosopher. He was an atheist. He started the Australian Thinkers Club, atheist group. He started the Australian Communist Party. And these men will never be forgotten within 10 years after their death. Anyway, we little guys suffer from that, unfortunately. So mud now, this is Plato's explanation. There's the universal man, there's the singular. And all the singulars are participating in the universal. And it's a matter of memory for us. A matter of memory. He did say, by the way, that there's one in which all these participate in, called goodness. Good. And he spoke of the good, and he spoke of the one, and he spoke of the beautiful. My first reading in a lot of this was actually in French, and sometimes you have to think which word did he use. So all those ideals, he speaks of God, he speaks of the beautiful, he speaks of the one. And as Professor Descartes says, it's not fair to say that Plato meant God by all of them, just reading Plato himself, but we've got a pretty good shrewd idea that he was referring to God as all those things. All those were attributes of God. And all these things were participating in that. So in the medieval period, Aristotle was even condemned. He was condemned as pagan. And Plato was upheld as a great man. It was safe for Christians to read. But St. Albert the Great, St. Thomas's master, and St. Thomas stood their ground and wouldn't budge. And they fought till Aristotle was released. So, that's what men should do. Father, what was his name? Jordan, Bishop Stewart. When I first came to the United States, I'd never heard of Bishop Stewart, an Australian bishop. And they're all telling me what a great bishop he was here. Then a friend came, Monsignor Lovell, St. Williamsville, wasn't it?
Peter and Paul.
Peter and Paul, yeah. And Father Jordan came to stay with him. And Jim Lakutis asked me to take him out and meet him or something and show him some of the sights. And I did that. He's a man who's a theologian and a canon lawyer. And my friends McManaman in Canada said, we must show you this Father Jordan. No, this is Bishop Stewart. His stuff is good. Do you know him? Oh, yes, I know him, he said. He was just Stewart's writer, actually. He did the writing for him. But this man was a great mind. I detected that very quickly, this Father Jordan. He was in pain the whole time I was showing him around because he had artificial hips, replacement hips put in. And he said to me, when you're fighting with an enemy, grab the truth. Don't leave it. Don't be defending yourself this way, that way, some other way. Get the truth. Ram it home. Keep ramming it home. Don't give up. Cling to the truth that you've got. And men find it very hard to face that. I liked that man. There was something about him. I was in the presence of a great mind. We drove out to Letchworth Park to show him the sights, and I just loved talking to that man. Like capital punishment. I've been condemned for my defense of capital punishment. 6 papers I've produced and been condemned for it as almost pagan, particularly from theologians at Niagara University, all of whom are dead now, incidentally. He said, stick to your guns, you know it's right. Anyway, my friends, so that's what Plato and Socrates did, stuck to their guns. And it is said, saved Western civilization. And all of these things existed in another world. Now, we have a word in English, Hades. It's made up of 2 Greek words. I'll write it in Greek lettering. There's no H in Greek. They have a sort of a comma over the A. Hades. So Hades has come from Hades. Without an idea. That's what Hades is. It's about the 3rd level of heaven, and you've got no idea of it. You can't have an idea. There's no idea in the mind about Hades. It's a place in another world that you've got no idea of. So we just call it Hades. And we all think of it as hell. Well, that's not what the Greeks thought of it as. So when you want to be polite to somebody, say, would you take a walk to Hades, please? So this other world where we've got only reminiscence of now and again, when I see these 3 people sitting and I think, oh, they're human persons. I had my mind once knew human persons in this other world. However, that's Plato's teaching. So now, and he said that there was a thing called the demiurge, which made men and implanted a soul in them. But as they regarded the soul as just some kind of a thing inserted into matter, they had no idea of a relationship between matter and form. That idea that that is matter and that is form. So the pure forms are in another world. Now Aristotle came along and he criticized his master, Plato, for this teaching. He said he multiplied the number of beings needlessly. Could you imagine how many pure forms there are? Here's the kind of problem they ran up against. Here's Joe. Here's Ted. Here's Bob. Ted is taller than Joe. Bob is taller than Ted. So each of these participative man, but for every form, there's a participation. Ted is taller than Joe. So he's participating in shortness, because he's shorter than Bob, and participated in tallness. So Ted is tall and short. They ran into that kind of problem and didn't know how to solve it. Socrates said, somebody said, you see, they're carrying on with this dialectic. Some people, as the head of the department in New England University in Australia, said to me on one occasion, he said, a lot of people think that Plato didn't teach us a philosophy, he taught us a method. And there's a lot of truth in that. He taught us a philosophy too, implied in his work. But he's teaching us a method. As somebody said, we're running into problems here. There's a pure mud, there's a pure tallness and a pure shortness, and they can't be found in the one man. See the difficulty they ran into. Ted is taller and Ted is shorter. So Aristotle criticized Plato and said he multiplied the number of beings needlessly. Aristotle saw there's matter and form, and we abstract. Now, I'm not going to dwell too much on that, except to say this. There was a great fire at Alexandria. There was a great library there, probably the best library in the world at those days, about the 1st century BC, I think it was, or AD, BC, I think. That library was destroyed by fire. Magnificent works from the ancient world were never found again. And one lot, Aristotle's, were all destroyed. But the Arabs found some. The Arabs found, the Arabic races had some of his stuff. So the first philosopher that come along that interests us in about the 10th century, Avicenna. He's Persian in origin by race, but he lived in the Arabic culture. Now he read Aristotle, and I want you to listen to what Aristotle said. I've got it in Aristotle's works himself. And the Arabs misunderstood it. He says, he speaks about something there which we're not interested in, just as for the second. The reason is that while the faculty of sensation is dependent upon the body, mind is separable from it. This is what Aristotle wrote. Separable from it. Now, what he meant by the word separable was he's talking about it's not a material thing. That's what he's talking about. He didn't have an appropriate philosophical vocabulary yet. Philosophical vocabulary is tremendously important. Those of us who are experts in the medieval Latin, for instance, we have very precise meanings for the terms. And he wrote a bit about that there, and he said a lot more too. So Avicenna read this, but he had it translated from Greek into Arabic, and he misread it. He thought it was separated from the matter. He thought that the soul, the intellect is separated from matter. And he thought there's a great intellect out there, call it an angel, call it what you like, but it's an intelligent being that did the thinking for us. Now let me explain what I mean by that. This caused a tremendous disruption in the medieval period. Here's the agent intellect, as Aristotle called it. The agent intellect, the manufacturing intellect. And here's the possible intellect, or the patient intellect. Operates on the image in the imagination and draws out of it the concept. The image would be Bob, say, and the concept will be man. Now, according to what Aristotle had read, translated from Greek into Arabic, the agent intellect is too big to draw an infinite concept out of Bob. It's infinite, the concept, every concept, because it applies to an infinite series, if you like, of singulars. No matter how many men exist, the concept of man applies to them all. So it's too big a job. So he saw this ancient intellect as something very special, separated. So it'd be quite legitimate to say, the Lord made me do it, buddy. I didn't do it, the Lord made me do it. So, what responsibility did we have? Some, apparently. Now, he misunderstood the word separable. Thought it was separated. And the translation from Greek, ancient Greek to Arabic was the problem. Even a Persian like Avicenna was in the Arabic culture. Too big a job for us to do. Now in about the 11th century, Averroes came along after Avicenna. You know, these are Latinized names. These are not their original names. Avicenna, for instance, is Ibn Sinha. I-B-N-S-I-N-H-A. That's their Arabic names. But Avicenna was a Latinized name. So he said, Averroes said, there's an active intellectual being, one for all men, and there's a passive intellectual being, one for all men. Both are separated from us. All that they're doing is working on our imaginations. And they're causing the concept, and the concept is so, it's infinite, so it's too great for us. So another being is receiving the concept. Where does it leave us? All civilization will be destroyed. Everything's gone. Government, education, we don't participate in that. There again, we can legitimately say, like Flip Wilson, the Lord made me do it, buddy. Nothing to do with us. You've got to flip a coin, I suppose. I thought that was funny. Thanks.
Was this the doctrine that was promulgated by Cigar of Brabant?
Siget de Brabant.
Exactly.
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah, well, somewhat. It's related to it. See, the whole of Paris was full of it, of Averroes. And the Averroes, as Arthur Little brings out in his beautiful little book on Platonism and St. Thomas, he said, the feelings got so high, even the clergy had to carry swords or sticks and travel in groups to ward off the attacks on them, the personal attacks. Things became decadent. Altars would have cards being played on them. It's sort of, it was a mess. What was being taught in the University of Paris was a big fight. And by the way, when they had debates there, their debates were always very formal. And I've heard two figures, 5,000 or 10,000. I don't know how you'd make 10,000 people hear you without a public address system, but participated in the debates at Paris. I've heard that there were 10,000, I think it was, there's 20,000 or something, in the Faculty of Arts, because it was the principal faculty. Medieval universities started out, there were two original ones in Italy, the north of Italy, and they'd have a faculty of law, a faculty of medicine, and a faculty of arts. They were the main, no engineering, agriculture, and all that sort of thing, which really belonged to technical colleges. But in any case, the battles were so fierce that they'd even waylay one another with swords and things like that. It was quite a mess. And the Dominican fathers, who were out in the field, in mission fields, they were established about, the 12th, 13th century, just before St. Thomas's time, 12th century or something. And they asked him to write the Summa Contra Gentiles, which has been translated in English under that title, A Summary Against the Gentiles. The Gentiles were the foreigners. And also called On the Truth of the Catholic Faith, been translated into English like that in the image books. It's a 4-volume work. And if you'd like to read it, I've got it in Latin or English. I bought the hardbound ones, 3 of them. I've only got 3 of them, haven't got the 4th. for 25 cents each when I was in Montreal. Some of the prices. I just bought Dennis Darby saw it and he couldn't believe it. That 4th edition of the Heritage English Dictionary, brand new, with a disc with the whole dictionary and a thesaurus in it, 25 cents during this summer at a yard sale. I said to the woman, "This 25 cents? Yes, take it," she says. It was marked 25 cents for all the books, 25 cents each. Hardback, brand new, beautiful, the books you get. The students at used to call me, what was it, King Midas. Everything I touched turned to gold. Those graduate students used to tell me. Unfortunately, it's not quite true. But in any case, they thought first that Avicenna thought the ancient intellect was too big for us, performed a job too big for us, and then Averroes thought not only that, but also the receiving intellect. The intellect which is in potency to receiving all things. It was too big a job for us too. Now St. Thomas corrected them. The ancient intellect is the active intellect in each of us that causes the, what did I just see in this misprint there somewhere? Causes in us the universal concept, this great being. And St. Thomas showed it necessarily belongs to each one of us. He fought them. In fact, I brought books along to show you. But he says here, for instance, in various passages, St. Thomas does. You know, he wrote his Summa, the big work he wrote, is 5 volumes. This is volume 1. And he says, whether there is an ancient intellect. And he goes on and he mentions people like Averroes, those, and shows them how they're wrong. And he shows us how the possible intellect was like a tabula rasa, a blank slate, and had to be informed by the ancient intellect, modelled after what's outside. Whether the intellect is a passive power, then whether it's an agent power. Whether the intellect is a power of the soul. And of course he proves how it must be. So St. Thomas had enormous tasks in the Middle Ages. It is said that he dictated to 6 secretaries at once. I have some of the writings of his secretaries, and his writing too, like pictures of them from the Roman and Paris museums. And how in the name of heaven anybody can read them? You'd have to know Latin thoroughly first, and then you'd have to be able to know paleography, how to be able to read the ancient script. You'd have QQ, meaning each, QS, meaning whose, QM, meaning of whom, and things like that. Shorthand writing in the Middle Ages. And I remember being in somewhere or other, and somebody who was with me, I don't remember who it was, and they said, "Can you read any of that?" I said, "Oh, some of it. I'm not a paleographer." And I said, "It says this." Woman staring at me, open mouth, next to me, and I wasn't conscious of that until somebody nudged me and pointed, "Look at that woman, she's her mouth's open as she tried to read it." Well, it's how these people who are specialists at it read it. They blow it up with a great big lens, etc., and sort of focus it on a screen. And they can determine little things, and they can even tell which secretary wrote which. It said he wrote, some said 4, some said 6 secretaries at once. But you can imagine, he's giving an answer to a question, and while that person's writing it, "Yeah, what's your question?" He'd raise, St. Thomas would give them, or he wouldn't actually ask them what their question is, he'd tell them what the question is, and then here's the answer. But anyway, St. Thomas answered these men. He goes all through it in the typical method of arguing. First, he raises the objections to his own teaching. Then he does his own teaching. Then he answers the objections to his own teaching. And it's beautifully laid out. All these men, he says here, the philosopher speaks. He doesn't often say Aristotle, but Aristotle, when he does say it, he calls him the philosopher. So, Averroes and Avicenna set the tone for the medieval period. So what St. Thomas did, he had a colleague named William of Moerbeke, Moerbeke. William of Moerbeke. I'm not sure what language his original language was and how he would pronounce that. Some say Moabik. I think it's Moabika. I think it might have been German. In any case, he knew the Greek language well. So St. Thomas asked him would he retranslate Aristotle's works. This man had an enormous appetite for this kind of thing. And he translated from Greek directly into medieval Latin. Not from Greek to Arabic and then to medieval Latin, where the mistakes were transmitted. He directed. And then he saw what they'd misunderstood in Aristotle. Separable, separated the intellects. So there's St. Thomas came, and we've preserved our humanity through all this. We're no longer dehumanized. I usually have a pencil, and I haven't got a pencil, and I've seen 3 mistakes spelling. Oh, it's too late now. I'll have to go through it again to find them again. I think I can do it. In any case, he translated them, and it went on to there, that he rewrote a lot of works. Now, St. Augustine gives a very interesting solution to this. But if you tune in at the same time, same place next week, we'll deal with that. Good night, bunky do.
Is it true that you talked about the church condemning Aristotle? It was because of that bad translation. Is that correct?
Oh, no, they just thought that Plato was more Christian.
I see.
More ethereal, yes, more Christian.
More spiritual.
And Aristotle was too down to earth. In fact, Raphael, painter, painted a beautiful picture a painting called The Academy. And in it, 2 men are walking in through the Academy. One like that, and the other like that. This is Plato, this is Aristotle. And I'll try and bring it in for you next time. And they thought that Plato was safer in his teaching, because it was more took into account heaven, you see. But Aristotle was firm, St. Thomas was firm, the same as his master, Albert the Great was. Albert the Great, by the way, was known in his own lifetime as Albert the Great. His knowledge so vast, tremendously vast knowledge of many, many subjects. Anyway, we'll have more to say about that next class. Thank you.